Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a CTO of FLEXE, a logistic technology company focused on reinventing warehousing and fulfillment to optimize the global delivery of goods for enterprise-class retailer and brands. Prior to FLEXE, he spent nearly 20 years at Amazon, including 5 years as a VP of Fulfillment Technology, where he oversaw the development and functionality of the technology within Amazon's fulfillment centers and the transportation systems. His name is David Glick. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
In some of your past podcasts and from our past chats, I like your honesty and being super down to earth. A bit more than 20 years ago, you and your wife were doing a PhD, living in your friend's basement. Eventually, you got a job at Amazon. 20 years later, you worked as a VP of Amazon. Now you're the CTO at FLEXE. That's quite a journey. I'd love for you to share with us about how you got into tech and how you got here.
Yeah, well, I'd love to tell this story. You know, my dad was a chemist. He was a PhD in chemistry, a chemistry professor. And so when I was growing up, I was like, well, I want to be a chemistry professor, or I want to be a physics professor. And so I marched down that road when I was in undergrad. And then in graduate school, I went into physics, and 3 years into my PhD, I was like, man, I'm not very good at this. I don't like it, and I'm not good at it. And I called my dad, and he said, oh, I wasn't very good at that either. Like, what do you mean? And I realized when I was growing up, he was the chairman of chemistry, and then the dean of arts and science, and then provost. So, and eventually the president of the university. But that was all about managing people, not doing chemistry. And so anyway, he told me this story. I was like, man, I wish you would have told me 3 years ago, and I could have short-circuited this whole thing. But, you know, I was like, man, I'm only 2 or 3 years away from finishing. May as well muscle through it. And I did. And so my wife and I both finished our PhDs the same year, 1998. And we decided that she was a very good biochemist and I was a very bad physicist. So we decided we would go, we identified Seattle, Boston, San Francisco, having never really been to any of those places, as places that had great tech, great industry, and great universities. And so we decided wherever she got a postdoc, that's where we'd go. And it ended up being University of Washington. And so we sold all of our furniture, all the stuff at our house. We had $600 in cash in our pockets, and we started driving across the country in my little Saturn with my dog. And we drove out. We didn't really have a place to stay. My buddy Aaron Noble, who was undergrad physics with me, he lived in Seattle, and so he rented us his basement for I think $300 a month, and he deferred the rent until I got a job, which was fantastic. Anyway, I lived there for about 3 or 4 months, my wife and the dog and I in the basement. And it was brutal. Like, job searching is no fun. And especially if you have no experience. Fortunately, one of the people I knew from my physics program at UNC had started in customer service at Amazon, and she was able to get my resume in the pile. And I got a call. And at the time I bought a book called The Non-Runner's Guide to Marathoning. And so I was up to 9 miles for my long run. So, a third of the way to a marathon. And I was out running when the recruiter called me, said, we want to bring you in for an interview. And it's like the best day of my life. Her name was Nicole Lee. And I run into her, and I tell her every time I see her that she changed my life. And so I started as a junior IT project manager at Amazon, and sort of moved up, moved up and over into software, and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, totally. Your dad is in education. How does growing up in a highly educated family influence you? Do you feel like you always enjoy scientific related things? What are some technical knowledge you've gained growing up? How does your family shape you into who you are today?
It's interesting. What I would say is all of my parents' friends were either doctors, lawyers, or professors. And so it was a very weird microcosm. And so I didn't know what else. And I didn't really want to be a doctor or a lawyer. So it's like, I guess the only other option is to be a professor. And my dad worked a lot and he loved working. And my mom was kind of the CEO of the house. But, one of the things she did, and I don't know if it was purposeful or not, was she set a expectation of achievement. And, I remember bringing home, it's junior year in high school, I brought home all A's, but I had like a 2 in citizenship instead of a 1, meaning I was kind of a bad, poorly behaved student in this one class. And I was showing my friend my report card, and I'm like, man, all A's. And I was like, oh yeah, but my mom's going to be mad about this 2 in citizenship. So she always had a very high bar. She insisted on high standards to put it in the Amazon vernacular. So I probably learned more of that from her. And she will tell you today that her methodology was benign neglect. Just let the kids do their thing, which I think is true. But she definitely left her mark in terms of setting high standards for achievement.
Totally. Do you have any siblings, or do you have a quote unquote competitor to compete with you when you're little?
Yeah, my brother is about a year and a half younger. And so he was 1 grade lower, and we were both on the wrestling team in high school. And,
wrestling with each other. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we started wrestling with each other. And when we joined the team, actually, we found that we couldn't wrestle with each other in practice because he would always get mad. And I remember once they did an article for us in the local paper about the Glick brothers wrestling, and they had us doing some drills together. And even in that short 10-minute period of time, he got angry because I did something. And so we agreed to go to our separate corners. Today, he's I don't know, you call it consultant or a lobbyist. He's an expert witness at postal rate cases. And so when the Postal Service is going to raise or lower rates, they have to go to the Postal Rate Commission. And, it's a big deal. UPS lobbies and the Direct Mailers of America lobbies and Amazon lobbies. So my brother is those are his customers.
Sounds like none of you went to be a professor. I believe you started at Amazon as a project manager. You've worked in multiple departments as VP at Amazon. That's pretty successful. I assume there were people who guided you throughout your career. How do you build up your personal board of advisors? Who do you consult your career decisions with?
Yeah, it changes over the years, but since probably 2004, 2005, we got 2 best friends, Dilip Kumar, who's now a VP of Amazon Go. He owns a Just Walk Out technology, and Chris Rupp, who left Amazon after being VP of Prime, and she's now the Chief Digital Officer at Albertsons. And the 3 of us kind of use each other as sounding boards and as we're making career decisions and life decisions. And so I found those folks very helpful. And then, you've probably heard this, that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so what I've been trying to do over the last 2 years since leaving Amazon is spend time with people who I'm impressed by and who are doing the things I want to do. And so I've built relationships with our board members and investors, and because I want to be a board member. And so I went to them and said, how do I do this? And so they were great partners. And then, my avocation is real estate. And I've been working with my realtor for, 15, 16 years. And he's a big hustler. He gets stuff done. He is very complimentary to me. I bring the capital and he does all the work, and we've had a great relationship. And so I like to spend more time with him because I want to be building these passive income streams outside of actually, being paid for doing work.
Totally. I think that's really smart. I mean, I guess I'm also doing the same by talking to you, which is trying to average myself up. But curious about when you're establishing these kind of relationships as a younger person, a challenge that I personally feel like I'm facing is I don't know what value I could add to the people who are way above my, I guess, pay grade or whatever you say it. How do you approach these kind of relationships if you're in a younger person's shoe when you feel like you don't really have much to offer?
Well, interesting. Your previous guest, Shelley Archambault, I listened to her podcast, and as you know, I reached out to her and said, she, for those who don't know, she is on the board of Verizon and Nordstrom and others. So she's someone I want to, be in part of her sphere. And so my pitch was, I'd love for you to help advise me on how to be a good board member. And what I bring to you is my network of connections with folks at Amazon, and my expertise in logistics. And if there's ever anything I can do to help, one of the things you have is you have a platform, right? You have a podcast, and it turns out that lots of people want to be on podcasts, or maybe I'm projecting. I certainly wanted to, which is why I reached out to you. But I assume like it's sort of a step towards fame, and so that's something you bring to the table. I think that the second thing, I spend a ton of time mentoring folks who call me, who either find me on LinkedIn, or there's a ton of folks at Amazon who are sort of at the, between manager, senior manager, director, and they're trying to decide, what do I need to get promoted to the next level, or should I leave and go do something else? And I spend lots of time with them because, I see every relationship, every interaction being a potential customer, potential employee, potentially a referrer, or potential employer. And so I guess I didn't actually tell you how to add value, but that's my mental model is like these conversations, we may do business together, or you may have a guest who needs fulfillment on your podcast, and you can say, hey, you should talk to Dave Glick. I believe that putting people together is super important, and people remember that even years later.
Absolutely. I'm super flattered and beyond thrilled to receive your message. I really appreciate that you're being super humble and just being really down to earth. And on the internet, I saw that you really promote other people's work. As a younger person, I think that's a great quality that I should be learning from you. When it comes to skills, what is one skill that you're trying to improve constantly? It could be technical skill like coding, or soft skill like sales.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I joke that I'm the least technical person at the company. And I've got my 12-year-old has to come in and plug in the mouse for me and set up my computer. And 15 years ago, my boss at Amazon said, you're really high potential, but you don't know anything about software. And, maybe you should go take an introduction to C class at the university, because I was in IT, not in software. And, I was like, well, I could, spend the next 6 years taking one class a semester and hating it and not being very good at it. Or maybe I just say, I'm not going to be a domain expert in software development. And what I end up becoming was a domain expert in people leadership. But, at some point there was a transition. And by the way, not being a domain expert in software has lost me several jobs. And I can talk about that. But, I had a boss named Kim Rackmiller, and I was running quality deployment and support in the supply chain tech org. And, she told me, look, there's no growth in this, right? The growth is all in software, and you're not a software developer. So you might be done, right? Your career may end here in 2004 at Amazon. And there's a process there called OLR, Organizational Leadership Review, where everybody gets together and talks about their teams and talks about, who are we going to invest in, and, what do we need to do for these people? And so she went to Jeff Wilke's OLR, who was her boss, and said, I've got this guy, Dave. He's pretty good, but he's not a software guy. And after that, Suresh Kumar, who's now the CTO at Walmart, he grabbed me, and he was a peer. He grabbed me and said, hey, I got lots of people who can write software. I need people who can get stuff done. Come work for me and we'll figure it out. And so I went from managing a team of about 50 people in non-software to managing a team of 2 people in software. And so for the first month, I built that team from 2 to 3 to 4. And then it turned into, oh, we need this. We have a problem with this other thing. And, Suresh grabbed me one day and said, hey, there's this guy who's leading the competitive monitoring team. He's a great engineer, not great manager. Right now, this is his problem. In a month, it's going to be your problem. So go fix it. And so I went and fixed it. And that led to taking on pricing, which was equally as broken and equally as important or more important. And I kind of went in there and said, ran what has now become what I call the Dave Glick Playbook, which is like, do we have what's broken right now? What's the most broken thing? Well, the page won't load, right? The web page where we set prices won't load. Well, let's go work on that. And then, every morning I'd get up and the first thing I would do is, did the page load last night? Did the prices get published last night? And it was, 4 out of 6 times it did, and the others it didn't. Well, let's work on that. And that's sort of operational excellence. If you sort of broaden it, does everything work? And that's usually the first 6 months of any new job. As I got to be more senior, it became, do we have the right people? And so in addition to operational excellence, it's let me look at the people who are here. I need to bring in my people, or I need to bring in senior people who can deal with operational excellence, and I need to move out the wrong people. And I read a book called Execution by Larry Bossidy, and he talks about spending 40 to 60% of the time with the people in the first 6 months of any new job. And so that's what I counsel all of my senior VP and VP peers is the most important thing you need to do is not deliver stuff. It's hire the right people, and equally as important, fire the wrong people.
That actually leads to my next question, which is being a non-technical person, how do you manage a high-tech team? Like you mentioned, your former boss told you because of you are non-technical, your career may end there. What was your thought process at that moment? Luckily, at that point, you found another job working with another peer leader. What made you stand out? So many people who are experts in tech. How do you make yourself so irreplaceable in terms of leading a technical team? At one point, have you ever took any coding classes? How do you leverage your strengths to overshadow your quote unquote weaknesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I first joined Amazon, I got on the shift reports and I would read everything that broke overnight, and I would get to know that. And then I was working with the fulfillment centers. I was the networking and systems guy for the fulfillment centers in 1999. And there was lots of new technology, lots of new equipment, and it spanned IT, it spanned software development, it spanned maintenance, facilities. We had automated sorters that nobody knew how to run. And so, there was a group of us, and we had a mailing list called Page-DC, because we called them distribution centers instead of fulfillment centers back then. And all of us would get paged on every Sev1 ticket in addition to the engineers, because we wanted to have continuity. And so after being paged every night for 6 weeks around Christmas time, I knew everything that could go wrong in a fulfillment center. And so that operational knowledge, that sort of not writing code, but watching what breaks and what didn't, that gave me a lot of credibility with my peers. The idea that I could get stuff done, when my software partners would call me and say, hey, this is broken, go figure it out, I would go do that and come back to them very quickly. And so you want to be seen as the person, at least when I was at that level of sort of individual contributor, your job is to produce product, right? My job is to get stuff done. And I was a PM or a TPM, not a coder. There's this old expression, it's who you know, not what you know. I will modify that. It's who knows what you know. So, it's important. Like all the jobs I've gotten are because someone said, I know that Dave knows how to do this. And, for example, the last job move I made at Amazon, I was leaving operations. I had decided that my course had run there. It was a wonderful experience, but I wanted to do something different. And so I called, my 3 friends in HR, said, hey, I'm looking for something else at Amazon. And within a week, I had 5 job offers that, other VPs had called me and said, hey, can you come over here? And Sebastian Gunningham, who was running merchants, asked me to come, run a piece of search for him. And so I think, building your reputation and all you really have, like people have technical skills and they have people skills and all those things, but your reputation is sacrosanct. And especially after you get to higher levels. I interviewed for a job. So I left Amazon in 2018 to retire. And I, walked away with no plan and spent 3 months sitting in the sun, drinking wine. And then when it started to rain, it wasn't as much fun. And so I said, I need to go back to work, or I need to do something. And so I had talked to an ex-Amazon guy who knew of me from others. We never worked closely together. And we had sort of this multiple month courtship. And then he talked to someone who I'd worked with at Amazon who said, he didn't do good at earned trust. And so that was the end of it. They didn't hire me. And that seemed unfair, but also it made me rethink, every interaction could be a future employee or a future referrer. When I joined Flex, I met actually Scott Jacobson at Madrona introduced me to Carl. And Scott was an ex-Amazon guy who I'd met in my networking. And he said, Flex has a huge market, great product market fit. They need someone to help with the product. You got to meet Carl. And so I met Carl. And, the minute after I left the office, Carl called a friend of his who used to work at Amazon and said, do you know this Dave Glick guy? And she said, yes, you got to hire him. And I called, 3 people and said, have you ever heard of Flex? And they said, exactly, huge market, great product market fit, need some help executing. And so, for better or for worse, a lot of these deals get done based on who you know, but it's not like, hey, this is a guy I go to the gym with. This is a guy whose work I know and I can vouch for them. And it's equally the other way is I have people who reach out to me and say, I'm thinking about leaving Amazon, or I'm thinking about a job change. Do you have anything for me? And I pick up the phone, and within 2 phone calls, I can find, nobody uses the phone anymore, but within 2 texts, I can find out this person's background, and it informs which way I'm moving. And, I don't say this is right or wrong. It's benefited me. It's hurt me, and it's benefited me. And I try not to disqualify people without getting to know them first, because it's happened to me and I didn't like it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. That demonstrates some strong people skills. What do you identify as your strength? What are some qualities that make you a great manager besides identifying the most important problem to solve?
I hope I'm a great manager. I think I'm a great manager. One of the indicators of being a great manager is people have followed me who've worked for me before and want to work for me again. What the feedback I get from my team is I give them autonomy, but hold them accountable. And, as you get more and more senior, and even at the junior levels, everybody wants autonomy, or everybody good wants autonomy. And so if you want to come work for me, I'm going to come and introduce you to your team, give you a broad strokes of the problem, and let you run. And, we jokingly, I don't know if it was jokingly or not, this guy who used to work for me called Maju Karavilla, who just became the CTO at Bolt. He and I were standing around talking to someone from HR, and they're building an onboarding program for new directors and new VPs because they found, there's infant mortality when people join Amazon at these high levels. And I said, I don't do any of that. I just introduce the new directors to their team and let them go. And we all laughed, ha, 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 ha. And Maju said, no, that's what he does. It happened to me. And, I don't know if that's the right thing or not, but for the most part, what I found is high performers want to be given the ability to create their mission, to manage their team, and they don't want me micromanaging them. And so basically what I select for on my team is, are you going to run your own shop? Do you need me? If you need me, then it's probably not going to work out, because I don't want to be deep in your domain because I won't be good at it. What I am good at is teaching them these kind of lessons and helping them develop. And so I think one of my superpowers is going around to people's peers, people's employees, and people's bosses, and finding out, what is it that they need to do to be more effective. And at Amazon, we had a great infrastructure for this, because everybody wanted to be promoted. Like if you didn't want to be promoted, you probably weren't going to do it well at Amazon. Like it was all type A, where great people go to feel bad about themselves, where overachievers go to feel bad about themselves, as the New York Times said. And so, early on at Amazon, I had a boss or a skip boss who said, the first thing, we're not going to talk about promotions. You shouldn't worry about that. You should just do your job. And I realized that people do want to be promoted. And so if we take that head on and say, these are the things you need to do to get promoted, these are the things you need to change to be promoted, and like make that part of the person's goals and part of my goals, what it meant is that the best people wanted to come work for me. The most ambitious people wanted to come work for me. And so one of my most proud things is I think I promoted 10 people to VP, or 10 people to director, 2 people personally to VP, and I've got another 3 or 4 who've been promoted or will be promoted, who are part of, Dave Glick's team, part of my network. And then, almost infinite amount of senior managers. And so when you are able to do that and you have a process for moving people's career forward and making them more effective, they will flock to you. And so 2 of them, I guess one of the people who I hired at Flex as a director came from a mutual friend who knew that this guy was leaving Amazon. He said, before you go to Facebook or Microsoft or Google, go talk to Dave. And so I was able to hire him for a significantly lower cash compensation with, equity upside. But it was because of, the second order network effects of, people trust me.
Absolutely. That's incredible that you could create these cult-like followings. Many companies may not have extra headcount. They can't promote everyone. If, say, I'm a young manager, I manage 10 analysts, but I don't have the power or headcount to promote anyone. People probably feel like working for me is sort of a dead end. How do I advise someone in that position to motivate their team?
Yeah, a couple things. One is, again, that as you're more junior, we talked about product, process, and people. Maybe we talked about that before we turned the recording on.
Yeah.
Let me talk about, when you're a junior engineer, all you have is the product that you produce, right? If you're not typing on the keyboard, you're not adding any value. As a first line manager or senior manager, you start thinking about process. How do I build processes which help the engineers produce more? And then as a director or a VP, you're thinking about, who are the right people? How do I hire these people? How do I coach them? And who do I need to move off the team? And so it becomes more and more important at higher levels. But that said, I always looked at places where there was growth. And so when I was leading quality deployment and support, there was no growth there. That was a defect, right? That was an area that people wanted to reduce that headcount. Whereas in software, we were always trying to grow that headcount. So my first 5 years at Amazon were reducing headcount in infrastructure, reducing headcount in quality deployment and support, which I thought was great, right? If I can do the same job with 5 people that used to take 14, I should be rewarded for that. But in the end, that doesn't lead to growth and that doesn't lead to promotions. And so I learned that you want to be in the place which is growing. That said, like at Amazon in particular, where it's all about growth, and at Flex, part of like if you are a first level manager, if you're a level 6, we would say, and you want to be a level 7, you have to promote people. You have to hire other senior people. Like you do not get promoted if you haven't done, those things from manager to senior manager. And so it was a constant drumbeat of, promote, hire. And and maybe there's other companies that are small and not growing. Like you don't want to be there, right? If you're small and growing, great. Like Flex, to me, I went from 3,000 people at Amazon to 50 people to managing 22 people at Flex. And now that 22 is 60 and it'll be 120 by the end of 21. And so it's fun to be in growth mode. And so even if it's small, you want to be in a place that's growing.
Absolutely. Getting into a fast growing team or company is not easy because it's normally very competitive. What are some strategies do you use to get yourself into the top teams or companies in the first place? I
aligned myself with bosses who I trusted. And this guy, Suresh, I mentioned before, I was in infrastructure, and so I was paid less than the software folks. And he wanted me to come work for him. I'm like, okay, well, I want you to give me a raise. And he's like, yeah. We'll figure it out. I'm like, Suresh, I'm not going to sign that offer letter until it has the right, better salary in it. And he's like, no, just come over and we'll figure it out. And I ended up doing that, and we figured it out. And they, over that year, I probably had a 30% cash raise to get me at the right place. And so I will always be loyal to Suresh. When he picks up, I moved out of his org at some point, but he would call me to be a bar raiser on his interview loops, or he'd call me because he needed something. And I would drop what I was doing and do whatever Suresh needed, then go back to what I was doing. And so, loyalty goes back both ways, and trust goes both ways. And what I found, I had great upward trajectories at Amazon, and I had terrible failures at Amazon. But often those were due, as obviously I take full responsibility for those failures, but they were often had to do with who my boss was, and did I trust them, and did they trust me, and were they looking out for my career?
How do you pick who you trust before they gave you a sign to trust them? For example, you have to work at his team, then he gave you a raise. At one point, you have to take a chance on him. Also, can you define a good boss or bad boss? What is a bad boss?
It's a good question. There's two things. One is I like bosses who would give me autonomy. They say, this is your mission, go after it. Mm-hmm. And their job was to go help sell me to the powers that be, whether it be in the OLR calibration meeting or whether it's give me opportunity to speak. And usually that meant my boss had to be significantly more senior than me. And I had a peer once who was raised to be my boss, and I ended up working for him. And I thought part of it was me. I thought I was more competent than him, and he was being rewarded as a senior manager, and I was a manager, and I felt like I was doing all the work. And so that ended up being a point of conflict. And I probably was an asshole to him. Like, he didn't like managing me any more than I liked working for him. And so one of the things, and that was early in my career, but one of the things I told myself was, I am not going to get in that position again. Mm-hmm. And I actually got in that position once again, and it turned out poorly for us. And so I would say choosing your boss is more important, or almost as important as choosing your job.
Wow, that's so true. I completely agree with you. I definitely think who you work with probably weigh more than what you do at your job. As a leader, you lead many departments: fulfillment, transportation, and tickets. Like we talked about earlier, you are not the most technical person on your team. How do you pick up the technical aspect of things? Do you depend on hiring the most technical people, or do you take courses to learn about technical side of things? If today is your first day at the fulfillment department, what would you do on the first day?
I think again about the playbook of operational excellence. Mm-hmm. Like, when you come into a new space, when I come into a new space, it's probably screwed up, because they wouldn't hire me if it wasn't screwed up. And so, you come in and everybody's got different priorities, and, you're going to change the strategy. You're going to change the people. You're going to change a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And so you want to make sure you're not changing quite too many things at a time. But one of the things you can get everybody to agree on is operational excellence is important, right? You like, the website needs to load. You can't have associates standing around on the dock, whether it's pricing, whether it's fulfillment. Like, that's something we can all get on board in. So let's run that playbook first, and use that as a way to evaluate the talent, which is sort of step 2 of the playbook, which is, mm-hmm. I need to bring my people in, and I need to either invest or move out the people who are there. And it used to take me 6 months to do that. Now it takes me 3 months to do that, because I'm very intentional about, like, I need to have people I trust completely on the bus, and I have to have people who I respect completely on the bus. And mm-hmm. so that's the first thing I do. And it doesn't matter if it's pricing. It doesn't matter if it's fulfillment. Everybody wants to get packages out of the door. Everybody wants to execute on pricing. It turned out at Amazon, there was the senior product manager for pricing was a guy named Jeff. And he was very deeply involved in what our pricing strategy was. And so like, I didn't need to learn much about pricing. I needed to learn about like, this is what our pricing strategy is going to be, and let's figure out how to execute on that. And one of our leadership principles there was invent and simplify. And you may hear Elon Musk talking about first principles thinking. I think he might have been a physicist as well, or some sort of engineer. But he says things like, the only laws we can't break are the laws of physics. And so what I try to do is think about, go back to first principles, both my intuition and other things. But I'll tell you, when I joined Fulfillment Center Software, it was at Amazon. We rebranded it to Amazon Fulfillment Technology, but it was not thought of as a good place to work. There were lots of tickets coming in, high operational load. And so we focused on this operational excellence. And I'm trying to think yes. So one of the things we did, and I knew that if we screwed up Q4 peak, I wasn't going to get promoted. Like we'd say things like, you're only good as your last peak. You're only as good as your last peak. And so I wasn't going to not get promoted because we screwed up operations. And so I put significant effort into building a Q4 prep plan. And we had each team write a document, and they had to give us all their configuration settings, all their scaling settings, and we gave them a template, and they hated it. Right? They were like, this is a big waste of time, bureaucracy, who's this new guy, not technical enough, whatever. And so they each did that. And I sat down with each of the teams. There were 40 different teams. I sat down and read each one of those documents with my direct staff and with our principal engineer. And in every single one of those, we were able to give them feedback about something they could do differently. And it could be about, configuration settings, JDBC timeouts, a number of connections from the load balancer, all of those little things which cause problems when you ramp up volume. And so what we saw was Sev1 tickets and Sev2 tickets dropped by 90% year over year. And in January, the folks who survived, the folks who stayed and prospered came to me and said, we hated this. We thought you were a bureaucrat, but now we see the results, and now we trust you. And that became part of my process, but also the process of all of these directors and VPs who came out of the team, exported that. And one of my good friends, Mike Bundy, would say, I'm running the AFT playbook. Like when I go to my next job, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart playbook. You got the right people on the team, pick the most crucial problem to solve, develop a strategy, and execute on it. How do you develop a new project or feature in a big tech company? Do you try to get approval for the budget from the management team first, or do you talk to the engineer first, or product team or designers? Where do you start?
Yeah, one of the things that I found is you should focus on the who, not the what. Well, what I found was that there are problems that keep coming up. And I'll give you an example. We had a bunch of outbound defects that kept coming up, and they come with the weekly business review, and the senior leadership would ask the retail folks, if we had better monitoring, if we had better visibility and inbound to detect these defects, would these not become customer defects? And of course, the retail people would all say, of course, Jeff, it's not our fault, right? This is, if we had better technology, it would work. And so this came up over and over again. And finally, the boss came and said, Dave, you need to fix this. And I want to see a paper in 2 weeks. And so I went away, and one of my directors and I wrote a paper, and we met with him, and he was like, this is great. Go forth and execute. I'm like, shit, we don't know how to do any of this. And so, I went and hired sort of a senior product manager, senior TPM. And what I found is we weren't getting traction. Then I went and found a director, a guy named Jules Graybell, and wooed him to my team. And then we started getting traction because we put the right person on it. And I don't know if you've heard the term single-threaded leader. It's a term that we use at Amazon a lot, and I hope goes out into the world, which is if you have someone whose job is to run all of receiving in the warehouse and to build a cool computer vision thing, the computer vision thing will never get built. If you have a person whose job is to build a cool computer vision thing and only to do that, and they'll either be promoted or fired based on the outcome of that, you're going to make traction. and it needs to be the right person. And so I always think about the who, not the what. And, that person can dive deep into this. And, if you're, I have the luxury, so I'm going to go hire my way out of this problem. If you're the junior person, your job is to be the person who gets hired to do that. Like you want to be the guy who's tapped over, guy or gal. I don't know what man or woman who gets tapped to be the single threaded leader to solve this problem. Because the next time people are going to say, man, I had a problem and that person solved that problem for me. I'm going to hire that person to solve my next bigger problem.
Yeah, I like that. Focusing on being the person who solved the most critical problem. So people will think you're critical and think about you for other big opportunities. You made some transitions from different departments. Do you think domain expertise matter to your job?
Yeah, for me, I think domain expertise is less important. And, I don't know if I want to say I'm pretty smart. Like that seems like an asshole thing to say.
You are pretty smart. I will say it. So,
and so one of my superpowers is to be able to pick up, the important fiddly bits very quickly of any new domain. Because they're mostly all the same, right? It's like we're not focusing on it. We don't have the right people on it. And then you go talk to a bunch of people, and they will tell you what you need to know. What's the biggest problems? One of the things I wrote a post about several months ago was like solve problems for your boss. In the absence of knowing anything else, find out what your boss's biggest problem is and solve that problem. And you're not going to be unsuccessful doing that. And so, what I try to do when I come into a new domain is say, what problem are we solving? Like I went to tickets. I didn't know anything about selling tickets, but we knew we need to have low prices, or we need to have a pricing strategy. We wanted to get as much selection as we could of the best tickets to sell. And we wanted to make it easy for the customer. Those are sort of the retail basics. The spin, there's two big problems we had. One was getting supply. And that was sort of a business development effort. And I didn't really know too much about that. But, obviously the other one's getting demand. And it turns out if you have the demand, you can go get the supply. And so one of the ways I simplified there was getting great technologists to come so that we could go do whatever we needed to do. But B is we were running on a standalone website called amazontickets.co.uk. They have X amount of traffic. If we could get to amazon.co.uk, we could have 1,000x as much traffic. And if you think about, low prices, big selection, fast delivery, and traffic, that's all you need to run a retail business. And so my focus was on how do we get as fast as possible to the traffic that Amazon.com provides. And we were marching in that direction, and I had brought some technologists in, and we had a good product manager there. And so the thing that I was able to do is like remove distractions. It's like, oh, they want us to do this. Nope, we're marching to amazon.co.uk. And it turned out we ended up shutting down the program for a variety of reasons before we got there. But we had a good plan, and we were marching in that direction.
I think you're such a people smart person. When you were in your 20s, do you always knew these quote unquote work philosophies? I think soft skill is probably matter more later on in your career. When you were working as a junior employee, the skills required to be successful was probably more technical because of you're doing the most repetitive tasks. How do you power through that phase when you are worked in a lower ranked position with less amount of flexibilities?
Yeah. The first thing, like my job was PM or TPM. It was TPM, but we called it small T because it wasn't a software PM. It was an infrastructure PM.
Right.
Or there was a team called Systems and Networking Operations Center, SNOC. So I was a SNOC PM. And so my job, my job wasn't writing code. My tool was the schedule, right? My job is to walk around with a Gantt chart and make sure that every one of my deliverables gets done. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't that great with a Gantt chart either, but I was all about being on the critical path. And so, I was in service. I knew who my customers were, which was super important. I knew who my boss was, but I also knew who my customers were. And generally, solve problems for your boss is very easy if you're solving problems for your customer and if those are aligned. So my customer was the software developers and the software development leadership. And it was the operations team who was standing up warehouses, because that was my first job, was building the network and the systems for new warehouses in places like Campbellsville, Kentucky, and Fernley, Nevada, and Coffeyville, Kansas. And so my job was to make sure that no one was ever bottlenecked on the systems, the phone lines, and the network being set up. And so, you could say lots of different things, but as I mentioned, one of my superpowers is simplifying. So, my first year out of grad school, I didn't know anything. All I knew was that I would never be the bottleneck for standing up these warehouses. And so I got, lots of positive feedback from my customers. But like there was another very important lesson in that. I summarize it as never read your own press. Because if you start, you listen to your customers and they're giving you positive feedback and said, oh, you're great. And then you look around and say, well, maybe I'm better than that guy. Or maybe I'm better than that woman. And you start feeling good about yourself. And that's when you get in trouble, or that's when I get in trouble. I was kind of a little arrogant jerk for many years. And actually, one of my bosses and mentors told me, I hired you to lead this, to be the manager of this systems engineering team. But my boss didn't want it because he said the way you carried yourself didn't reflect well. I found this out much later. But this guy, Q Shea, bet on me, which was fantastic. But the point being that I feel like I'm gifted, I'm privileged, whatever the term is. I like in my older years, in my 40s and in my 50s, and especially after I got promoted to VP, like there were no promotions for me after VP. Like there was never a path to senior VP at Amazon for me. And so I started thinking about how can I give back? How can I be kind? And I'm a competitive person. I look around at people who are ahead of me or my peers and like, oh, that person's not as good as me. That's sort of one of my first reactions. And so that's super toxic. And so I work very hard and I fail sometimes at not being toxic or by going and being kind as much as possible. It forgives some of the negative things that I do.
Now you're the CTO at FLEXE. Can you give us a general picture of your day-to-day there? What are some newest technologies in the fulfillment space?
Sure. I'll tell you the origin story of the company because I think it surfaces a lot of problems in the industry. Mm-hmm. My boss, Carl, who's the founder, he was at a party and one of his friends came up to him, this housewarming cocktail party, something, and said, I'm about to sign a 5-year lease for 100,000 square feet of warehouse space that I don't need. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, tell me more. Why is that? It's like, well, these warehouses want me to sign 5-year contracts or 3-year contracts, long-term contracts, and they want me to put capital in to start. And maybe that's building rack. It's all about the 3PLs, the third-party logistics companies, reducing their risk. And if you could go find me 20,000 square feet that I can use for the next 3 months coming up on Christmas to stage inventory that I'm sending into Amazon, I'd be your first customer. And so Carl went and looked around. There must be someone who does this. And nope, there wasn't. And so the idea of on-demand warehousing came about. And they started with, so the idea is there's always empty space somewhere. Warehouses come in 2 sizes, too big and too small. And so if you can tap into that excess space, you can put people into that space and you don't need to charge them a bunch of money because it's zero revenue space at the time. So you can sort of arbitrage that with the space owner. Mm-hmm. And so they started out by storing pallets of stuff, and then they moved into what we call retail distribution, which is pallet in, pallet out. Mm-hmm. Sort of mixing center or cross dock or whatever you want to call it. And that's still pretty simple, right? You've got 100,000 square feet. You maybe have 10 forklift drivers who are driving around putting pallets on trucks. And then when I got there, they were just getting into single item fulfillment, meaning you've got, 1 million Instapots in the warehouse and, everybody's ordering an Instapot. It ships alone. You stick a sticker on the side of it, put it on the UPS truck out the door. And that's relatively simple. And then this last year, we built multi-unit shipments, which is much harder. Is you have to go send people out to pick and then put 2 things in the right box, right? And so you're sorting through, you pick 40 items and you have to pick which are the right ones. And so multi-unit shipments, we think are a sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And then if you think about, Amazon was at 2-day shipping, right? And then they're at 1-day shipping. Now we're at same-day shipping, 2-hour shipping. And so everybody's like, what do I do, right? How do I compete with Amazon? Mm-hmm. And, most people have, one warehouse in Ohio, they can ship in 3 to 7 days and they're just getting killed. And so you say, well, you need 2-day shipping. Okay, well, we need 3 warehouses, which means 3 warehouse leases And maybe you can do them all with the same company. You have one in Newark, one in Ohio, and one in LA. Right? You can maybe do that with the same company, and they're going to charge you a bunch of startup costs. So, but maybe you're spending $1 million before you ever ship a unit because of all the startup and the license fee and the integrations and all these things. And then Amazon's like, we're doing 1-day shipping. And to do 1-day shipping, Amazon's got hundreds and hundreds of warehouses around the country. If you want to do 1-day shipping, you need at least 9 to 12. And you can't get that from a single 3PL. And you don't want to pay $500,000 of startup costs. And you don't want to sign 5-year leases for warehouse space. And so we come along and say, you do one integration to us. The warehouse management system is free. There's no capital up front. And we will put you into 9, 10, 12 nodes around the country. And so you can service 90% of the population in 1 day with zero fixed cost. That's a super compelling argument. And what we found in the last couple months, and a lot of it's driven by COVID, is that we have customers calling us saying, I want to do same-day shipping, not next-day shipping. And that means you need 20 nodes, right? You need a node everywhere there's an NFL team or anywhere there's a basketball team. New York, Chicago, LA, Boston, Seattle, North Carolina, Charlotte, and so on. And so we believe we are uniquely positioned to find that space and integrate people and get them up and running. And so if you're the brand manager at Kraft Heinz, or you're the VP of e-commerce at Kraft Heinz, and you're like, well, my D2C strategy is Amazon, right? My e-commerce strategy is Amazon. But I want to have a relationship with my customer. So I need to do, 1-day shipping. And so you go to your boss, say, I need $10 million of capital to stand up 12 nodes and sign 5-year leases. Right? No way. But if you say, I need $500,000 of capital to put some macaroni and cheese outside of Chicago and see if I can ship same day into Chicago and see if there's a lift. If there's a revenue lift, it pays for itself very quickly. And if we can make the economics work by reducing the shipping cost to a manageable level, like that's a huge value proposition. That's a huge step forward, and it opens up for the Kraft Heinz, for the Lowe's, for the Samsung, whatever. These big companies are all looking for ways to get into same day, next day, because they don't know what to do about Amazon.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you go a little bit deeper into the behind the scenes of 1 day or 2 days shipping? What type of technology do you have to invest in? Maybe robotics or warehouse technology? How does it work?
Yeah, we work with 1,500 different warehouses, and they have different shapes and sizes and different available capacity. And this is across the US and Canada. And so that is sort of our supply base. And then we work with enterprise customers. Our biggest customer is Walmart, and like big companies, not sort of Amazon sellers for the most part. And we have a technology platform. And for the seller side, or for the customer side, the shipper side, we do a single integration, and then they can pass back and forth inventory data and shipment data with us. And then there's no integration on the warehouse side, because we just send them a box of scanners, and the scanners have our software pre-installed on it, and they have a website, and it all runs in the cloud. And so it's very easy for the warehouse to stand up a new instance, stand up a new customer in a few days. And we've purposely made our warehouse management system very easy to train for the folks, the associates, who some of them don't speak English. Some of them are temps who've never worked in a warehouse before. Like you have to make it very simple to operate this thing. And then from the technology side, I work very hard to simplify and keep on first principles. And so it's very easy for me to say there are 2 processes in the warehouse. One is you take stuff off trucks, and you put it in rack, you put it in bins. The other one is you get customer orders, you pull it out of a bin, and you put it in a box and put it on a truck. And so that's how I think about it. And my product managers are like, Dave, that's way too simple. Like there's lots of error handling. There's lots of sophistication in that. And I'm like, okay, do you want me to get involved? And I'm happy to help you solve those problems. They're like, no, you go do your thing. We'll do our thing. And sometimes I'll do reviews, but for the most part, all of these people who work for me have more domain knowledge than I do. And I think there was a third question that you had. Oh, robotics. What I've seen over and over again, that putting automation into warehouses is a two-edged sword. So in Amazon in 1999, we hired a bunch of folks from Walmart, and they were given the mission, I want you to 10x our warehouse capacity. And so they put in an automated sorter, they put in a pick-to-light system, they put in a bunch of conveyor that had routing, but it was all built for case level picking. When in Amazon, we were picking eaches, right? We were picking single items and sending to customers, but Walmart had been picking cases for 50 years. And so we built the wrong technology, and it took us years to dig ourselves out from that because we didn't know what we were doing. The next case is Tesla, right? They built this robotic line for the Model 3, and they ended up ripping it all out and building a tent in the parking lot. So now the counterexample is Amazon brought in the Kiva robots in 2012, which was one of my projects. And Amazon knew very deeply how the processes worked. They knew very deeply what their capacity was. They knew that they either had to build for peak capacity and have it underutilized the rest of the year, or they built for the rest of the year and had to figure out another plan for peak. But they were like very, very, very good operators. And so most people aren't. And most people aren't working at the million shipments a day type of scale that Amazon, Walmart, Target are working. And so for the vast majority of customers, I recommend them not to put in a bunch of automation because it doesn't scale up and scale down. Humans scale up and scale down very well.
I saw one of your investors was Prologis. They own a lot of warehouses. Can you talk a bit more about the real estate side of things to make fast delivery happen?
Yeah, there's kind of three layers. One is who owns the building. Prologis and Blackstone and other big REITs often own the building. And then they rent it or they lease it to 3PLs. And then and so the building ownership is very concentrated, I think. And it's funny because you think about Blackstone, like who's their biggest customer? Amazon. Prologis, who's their biggest customer? Amazon. Everybody else, who's their biggest customer? Amazon. But after that, like they lease to lots of different people. And so then the 3PLs is much more fragmented. You've got XPO, who rolled up a bunch of 3PLs, DHL, who rolled up a bunch of 3PLs, Geodis, who rolled up a bunch of 3PLs. And those are the three big players in the US. And then you've got tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And so we work both with XPO, DHL, and Geodis, and then we work with the tier 2, 3, 4 players. One of the things we found is that we add a ton of value to the not XPO players, to the tier 2, 3, 4, because they may have been for many years shipping pallets in and pallets out, and they may not even have labels on their rack space. They may have said, "Oh, Bob remembered he put this pallet over there, so we're gonna go pick that pallet, and Bob's gonna drive it onto the truck." It's a pretty simple operation, and you make $20 to $30 a square foot from your space there. If you are picking eaches, right? If you are bringing things in and picking individual items, that's a much more labor intensive and much more sophisticated process. And so you really do need a good warehouse management system, and you do need some expertise. And so what we go in and say, we have this WMS that supports picking eaches and fulfillment and 2-day, 1-day, same day shipping. We're going to give it to you for free. And instead of doing 500, 10 trucks a day, 260 picks a day of pallets, we're going to let you do 20,000 picks a day of eaches. And guess what? You make more money because you got 100 people in the building instead of 10 people in the building. And so you're doing $100 a square foot of revenue, not $20 a square foot of revenue.
When I was working in venture in China, I saw many of the startups were focusing on last mile delivery. Curious, in terms of technology, is there any innovations that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, our innovation is putting inventory close to customers, right? Like if you think about what's the difference between 2-day shipping, or what's the difference between 3-day shipping and 2-day shipping and 1-day shipping and same day, is you still have to pick an item off the shelf. You still have to have someone drive it to a customer's house. And then the time in between there is someone putting it on a truck and driving it to the last mile provider, driving it to the delivery station. And so basically the biggest innovation you can do, and you've seen this with Amazon Prime Now, and you've seen it with Amazon putting warehouses outside every major metropolis, is you can put inventory close to customers. And then, obviously the big thing over the last several years is gig economy and crowdsourced workers, and Amazon has a program called Amazon Flex. DoorDash is doing home delivery of packages now. There's a company called Roadie. And so you're seeing, Target bought Shipped and Deliv. And, you see all of these things that are running around the crowdsourced marketplace, because that's the only way you can do it. You're not going to pay, $40 an hour to a UPS driver to deliver these things, if you're only doing 1 or 2 or 3 packages per route.
If you're investing in this space, what are some areas you would put your personal money in? Of course, you're a company. So.
I think Flex is a good investment. Fortunately, I didn't have to put my own money in, but I'm putting effectively my opportunity cost in. I invest. I am an angel investor, but I mostly invest in people, like people I know or who are my friends, and I'm probably not sophisticated enough. And so what I often do is bring co-investors, who people I work with me and who are more deep dive folks. I bring them in and they ask hard questions, and so we make decisions together. I was able to invest in a Madrona fund, which was exciting because they know what they're doing. So I don't think I'm a particularly good and insightful investor yet.
Thank you so much, David. So we're at the last part of our interview. I have a little fire round for you. It's going to take 1 minute. The first question is, what's your favorite book?
Lord of the Rings.
I love it. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
There's a bunch of people. Dave Clark is one of them. Suresh Kumar is another, and Rick Beatty, who's now retired. I mentioned Suresh is now CTO at Walmart, and Dave Clark's about to be CEO at Amazon, and then Rick Beatty rode off into the sunset.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I like to invite, I have a birthday party every year, and I like to invite everybody I know because it's a celebration of me, which is my favorite thing. If you're saying, who outside of my sphere, I'd love to meet, I met Elon Musk. I had an interview with him, which I didn't pass because I couldn't code. But I think, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates are sort of 3 people who I think are smarter than everybody else, and I love to learn from. And I have interacted a bunch with Jeff, for half an hour with Elon, and I'd love to meet Bill Gates. So I guess the answer is Bill Gates.
I love it. Where can we? Yeah, wait. Sorry.
One more, Stacey Abrams. I think she's done amazing things. She organized Atlanta, she organized Georgia, and she's personally responsible for flipping the Senate. And so I have great respect for her, even though I've never met her.
Where can we find you outside of work?
I lift weights. I spent a lot of time. I've got a garage gym now. I lift weights, do pull-ups. You'll see me post some things about that.
I saw it on LinkedIn. Yeah, weightlifting things.
Yeah, so I really like that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Beside LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now, you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.